So I was recently at a women's empowerment retreat, and some of what I experienced wasn't so empowering. And so I thought maybe I could share some of what I experienced and just kind of discuss like maybe how we can show up differently for each other. Um, it's interesting because part of the initial thing I started to feel was there was the primary facilitator, and then there was her partner. And there were points where she would ask her partner to facilitate certain portions, and then it became like this power struggle. It was like the main facilitator would correct her. She would start to interject. It was like they were talking over each other. It was like this power struggle, and it was interesting to watch, and it was actually like I could feel it activating my nervous system, because I when I saw the assistant or her partner, I saw her as this loving being, and I think sometimes when we have this desire for things to be perfect, or we have certain expectations about the way it's supposed to look, then we can inadvertently step on people, in our effort to correct it, to make it like we want it to look. And in this case, like it felt, and I use violence in a different way. Like violence to me, like if you talk about nonviolent communication, it can be verbal or nonverbal, but it's anything that feels like an attack on your system. And as I was watching this dynamic happen, it felt very violent towards my system because it felt like, the person wasn't really giving this person the space just to be who they were and to facilitate the beautiful way that they would facilitate. Um, so that was the first thing that my system noticed. And then, day two, we're sitting at lunch, and I'm sitting with the main facilitator, and she tells me that I talk too much and that I need to learn to listen more, which I found very shocking because I think that's one thing that I'm very conscious about, especially, having been in the military as a woman for 25 years. Like I'm very conscious about, giving those voices that aren't heard space. It's called centering. So it's basically like there are going to be stronger voices, and I think like as I've stepped more into my power and I've stepped more into my voice, I'm very conscious about people in this space who maybe are more shy or they haven't stepped fully into their power. And so centering is really offering those people a space where they can step up, and they're encouraged to step up and to step into their power. And that's generally something a facilitator would do, but as a participant, I found myself kind of stepping back and going, okay, so they're not being encouraged to step up. Do I hold back? Do I step forward? Do I maybe break the ice? But it was interesting to me because that's a very conscious thing that I am focused on, is centering voices that maybe haven't stepped into their power, to encourage them to step into their power. And so it was interesting to hear that from her, but it was also, again, very violent to my system, because unsolicited advice, if anybody has ever been the recipient of unsolicited advice, it's very violent to your system. It's like a boundary crossing, like people stepping in to give you advice, tell you how you should do things, completely uninvited. And so that can be very violent to our systems because it is a boundary crossing. You're coming into a place where you're uninvited. And even though I was at this retreat, that wasn't an open invitation for advice giving. You still would ask permission. Hey, this is what I've noticed. Are you open to some feedback? Or are you open to some coaching or some mentoring? And this is a very loving way to invite someone into a space with you. Um, and it's interesting because as I started to explain to the facilitator, yeah, I spent 25 years in the military. I didn't have a voice, and now as I'm stepping into my voice, like I'm actually very conscious about how I show up and how much space I take up, and all of this. And she just kept going, with, yeah, you need to talk less, to listen more, which in general I think is very good advice. but it felt very violent to my system. And as I started to sit back and I started to evaluate, okay, what's going on here? Like I don't understand why I'm being given this advice. And I even had asked a couple of the other participants, hey, how do you perceive me? I want feedback. Like, do you think that I'm talking too much? Do you think that I'm taking up too much space? And the feedback that I got, which hopefully was honest feedback, was no, I think you're very balanced. Like you offer valuable contributions, but you also step back and listen, which is optimally where you want to be. And then I started to go, okay, what's going on here? And I had noticed some other situations where we would be talking about, because in this space there are obviously a number of people doing this work. And I noticed that as we were sitting in the hot tub, or we were just like at meals or whatever, whenever what I would call competitors would come up, even if it was something that this person brought up, they would get very defensive and they would shut it down or they'd walk away. And so I started to ask myself, okay, is this the dynamic that's playing into this unsolicited feedback? And honestly, I'll never know. But what it got me to thinking about, there's this wonderful, wonderful book, and it's called, what's it called? Woman's Inhumanity to Woman. And what it talks about is internalized sexism. And it's basically where and it talked about more extreme examples too, like where there are like honor killings, and where like mother-in-laws in certain countries will like literally set their daughter-in-laws on fire and that sort of thing. So more violent, extreme examples. But it also talks about this internalized sexism, and how sometimes when you've been part of this system where you've been the victim of sexism, you start to internalize it. You start to believe that that's the way the world should be. And the way it comes out, it is often a lot of shoulds. Like, you should behave this way, I should behave that way, and it's what we've internalized, but it may not necessarily be the way that we should there's my should the way we could be showing up in the world in a more empowered way. And in this example, the way it came out was, you should be talking less, you should be listening more. And my initial reaction was, this is the way that I have been treated most of my adult life. I came into the military at 18. I was literally told by bosses, shut your mouth, stop talking. My voice was not valued as a woman in the military and as a woman in military police. And I think sometimes we can start to take that on. Like, okay, maybe I need to talk less. Maybe this is the way a woman should behave. And what I'm inviting you to do is to look at your shoulds, whether it's to yourself or to other people. Like, what shoulds am I imposing on people in my life? And I won't even limit this to women, because we do it to men too. Like, a man should behave this way, or like I should behave this way, or you should be. And in therapy, we always say, don't should on yourself, because it's rarely ever beneficial to anyone involved. And so what I'm asking you to do is to look at your shoulds. Where am I shoulding myself? Where am I shoulding other people? And is this in alignment? And this is for you to look at, is this something that I want to live into in my life? Is this a role that I want to take on? Is this a role that is in alignment with who I am and my truth? And then I would just invite you, if you're shooting on other people, to maybe turn more of your focus inward. Because I think we spend a lot of time policing other people. And they say, let ye without sin cast the first stone, or clean your house before you start judging other people's houses. And I know that my house is dirty, and so, like, I have enough of my own work to do. um, But this is the invitation today. Look at your shoulds. Am I shoulding on myself? Am I shoulding on other people? What would be the most empowering thing for my life? And where have I maybe internalized some of this sexism, or whatever ism that you have internalized? But yeah, so this is where I want to get back to choosing love, choosing empowerment, and choosing